Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Michael Lukk Litwak, a writer and director whose delightful first feature, Molli and Max in the Future, stars Aristotle Ansari and Zosha Mamet as a man and a woman whose orbits repeatedly collide over the course of 12 years, 4 planets, 3 dimensions, and 1 space cult. It's funny, and it's sweet, and it's very clever about what sci-fi can do to human stories, and it's still screening in theaters around the US right now, and making its way to a North American VOD debut. You'll want to keep an eye out for it. Michael picked Jurassic Park, Steven Spielberg's glorious 1993 blockbuster, based on the novel by Michael Crichton, about an island where genetically resurrected dinosaurs jump around and eat people, including the scientists who brought them back to life. You remember it, right? Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum, Richard Attenborough, Sam Jackson, the kids? Probably you remember the dinosaurs. That's what we were there for. And this movie delivered them like nothing we'd ever seen before, because we hadn't. That's pretty awesome. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I think it's one of my favorite movies of all time. And I think it's my favorite because every time I watch it, I notice something different about it. I think it's one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. I think, and then recently, like I just rewatched it again for this, and it actually took on a whole new meaning that I had never even really thought about, which is that to me, it's like actually a movie about being a creative person and being a film. I read it as like Steven Spielberg kind of reflecting on being a creative filmmaker and having to balance all of these money people and the constraints and the economic kind of the clash between your dreams and your reality, and how sometimes you can enter into things with the best of intentions and then they can go horribly wrong. And to me, I think this movie is a family movie. It's also a horror movie, and one of the horrors is the fact that this is a movie about a group of people like genuinely trying to make something beautiful and do it for the right reasons, and then because life is complicated and nothing ever turns out the way you think it is, everything goes wrong. And I think every filmmaker can kind of relate to that, because you have the version of a movie in your head, and ideally the things that go wrong are all kind of fixable, and the compromises you make are never so bad that they ruin the film. But things can go horribly wrong on a film set too, and people can get hurt. And I think that is also something that is like really terrifying to think about, of like you start a project and you really want it to be successful at all costs, and then because of a confluence of different events, it can go haywire.
I don't know that I'd ever considered that read. I mean, I tend to. We just did an episode a little while ago about heist movies and how the germ of the heist movie appeals to filmmakers because it's making a movie, right? Like it's production. But I'd never stopped to think about Jurassic Park taking the same attitude. But you're not off base, right? Like the law of unintended consequences, if nothing else. Like everybody's always talking about happy accidents and out of this tragedy we built our masterpiece, that kind of thing.
I mean, I think the character of Hammond is like one of the best villains, if you can even call him that, of all time, because they spend so much time, and you want Jurassic Park to exist. You're like, oh my God, but it would be so cool. And you're like, you see the dream and you're like, no, he's in it for the right reasons. He's not just trying to bleed everybody dry. He actually cares about what he's doing. He's not, he's super sympathetic. And I mean, it's also just crazy that like you have in the, there's the scene where he's kind of like eating the ice cream that's melting, and you just have this like wistful kind of like quiet dialogue scene in the midst of this crazy action movie. And you kind of see him in this denial of like, well, next time it'll be better. Next time it'll be better. And, he's kind of slowly coming to this realization of like, oh, there isn't going to be a next time. And I think that he's just one of the greatest on-screen characters I've ever seen. And then, so I think like, I mean, so many of the characters in this movie are so great, but I also think like it's the more I learn about the movie and how it was made and the process of making it, and then also finding out things like the fact that like Steven Spielberg directed this and then directed Schindler's List in the same year.
He was
Like
cutting this while directing Schindler's List, which I've never been able to reconcile. The
it's
idea that he was
it's
editing this film and making that at the same time.
yeah, I mean that is just mind-blowing too, of just like the range that he can pull off, and how each one of those movies is so completely different, but can also show the range of like what's possible with cinema.
Yeah, I mean, it's the definition of one for me, one for you, right? Like, as you have to be, I think you have to be Steven Spielberg and no one else to say, I'll make you your gigantic dinosaur epic if I get to do my personal Holocaust movie,
Yeah.
and have Universal say, sure, okay, I guess. Like, because they weren't sure it would work. They weren't neither film. They weren't sure either film would work. The the I have this whole thing about how the movie came together, and I don't even want to get into it because what I wanted to do is focus back on what you said about Hammond and how those are fundamental changes that Spielberg and David Koepp made, right? Because in the book, he is a straight up villain. He's an industrial. He's Michael Crichton's version of a steel magnate, like just a guy who doesn't care about anything and wants his way. And the changes to the novel, I think, are what make the film the allegory that you're talking about, because it unpacks it from a different direction, but also fix all the problems in the book. They keep the interesting characters alive. They swap the ages of the kids just to make them more interesting and more dynamic. They give Lex a lot more to do. So there is an equivalent of a female lead for kids to identify with, which is something Spielberg always really cared about, making sure the young audience had a stake in an action movie, because that way they're not terrified. Like if you see kids on some level and you're a kid, you identify with them and it's safer for you. He said he figured that out with E.T. and Temple of Doom. But with Jurassic Park, the way it breaks across all ages, like it is the first 4-quadrant crowd pleaser, right? Because it appeals to absolutely everybody and has this fantastical notion that makes adults kids again, because it reconnects us grown-ups technically to the idea of the wonder that we had when we were kids, and we were so disillusioned to find out that the dinosaurs weren't around anymore. I mean, I remember being, I guess, 7 and really into dinosaurs, and so, what do you mean I can't go find them? Why can't I go see them? That's not fair. The skeletons in the museum, that's just because they're not on this continent, right? There's got to be a place. And that's
100%.
The genius of Crichton's book, is that he gave you that place. I don't think he even understands the mythic level of that, like the connection to kids and obviously to adults that entails. But Spielberg did, and he
definitely
built it in.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think, I completely agree with the one for you, one for them kind of like big picture analysis of it. And I do think like Spielberg also has movies that are more or less personal, but like, I think it's sometimes easy to dismiss a movie that's like super commercially successful as like not necessarily being as deep. But I actually think part of the reason I love Jurassic Park is that I think it is like very sincerely reckoning with deep themes. And at the end of the day, it's Prometheus, it's Frankenstein, it is this kind of like sci-fi origin story of like that gets to the heart of what all great science fiction is. And one of my favorite quotes about science fiction is that like it's not about predicting the flying car, it's about predicting the traffic jam. And
right.
and I think it's like, I think Frederick Pohl said that. And I do think that it also works on a character level as the story of a person who isn't sure they want to bring life into the world, and then realizes that like through the chaos of this experience that he would actually make a great dad. And so I think it functions on an incredible visceral popcorn roller coaster level, but I also think it's an incredibly emotional movie, and you can kind of see the effect it's had, where like there are these character storylines of the way that that storyline has influenced movies in the terms of like having a male protagonist who doesn't want kids, and then by the end of the movie wants kids, like or finding kind of that fatherly role. And I see that kind of has influenced culture in a really serious way. And then on the other hand, like you have to remind yourself that like I've heard that the reason the Toronto Raptors are named the Raptors is because of this movie.
Absolutely
and
true.
like
Absolutely true.
people didn't think about dinosaurs the way that they did before this film. And it's something that you just like take for granted as like, oh yeah, everybody likes dinosaurs. And like, it's just crazy to think about a world where this movie didn't exist and people kind of were like, all right, yeah, whatever. Dinosaurs are fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was, what was it, 1993? I would have been 24 when it came out. And the impact it had, the like we all kind of made a face when the Raptors named themselves, because it's like, Jesus, really? Are you just riding this trend? Of course you are, because that's what Toronto does. And it turns out that it stuck and everybody's cool with it, because obviously Jurassic Park didn't go away. Like there's 6 of them. 4 of them are good. And but the lasting effect of this, I'm honestly shocked that Elon Musk hasn't announced he's going to open a Jurassic Park. Like it feels like the kind of dipshit thing that somebody with way too much money and not enough sense would do just to chase the clout. But it is so much a movie of the moment. I mean, I will go to my grave arguing that Jaws is the greatest American film ever made, because it is the nascent blockbuster, and it's the birth of commercial cinema. But it's also that first hour, because they couldn't show the shark, is an Altman movie. It's all about this organism, this town, the people interacting badly with one another, and then just the shark is the bad actor that makes them all sort of realize what they need and what they owe to each other. But Jurassic Park builds on that by isolating the story and having everyone bring their baggage, which again is something that Spielberg learns on the fly.
Definitely. I mean, I was reading about it, and there's only 8 minutes of dinosaur footage in this movie, in this 2-hour movie, and it's 20 minutes until you see the first like live dinosaur. And I mean, you get a glimpse of the raptor in the opening scene, and they do a really good job of being like, don't worry, like people are gonna get killed by dinosaurs. But it's kind of insane, like the amount of restraint that the movie has. And I think it is also one of those like great lessons of filmmaking, of like it's often it's more about the buildup than the release, and it's more important to put time and energy into the setup than the punchline. Because the punchline only works if you spend that time, building up that tension and then releasing it afterwards.
Yeah, well, it's not about the monster. It's about the people running from the monster. I mean, there's 70 years of Godzilla movies, and only the last 2 or 3 have figured out the characters have to be as dimensional as the creatures.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and that's the other thing is like, I think that this movie is such a masterclass on so many different levels. And like, the last time I watched it, I was realizing that like Steven Spielberg like loves a good hat on a character, and like all of his characters are defined by their hats. So like Gennaro has the fedora lawyer hat, Hammond has his hat, like the construction workers have their hats, the Muldoon, the hunter, has his hunting hat. Like I think like Edgar Wright has talked about how like when you have a character, you want it to be easily drawn, and finding, designing your characters so that they feel visually distinct. And I think like this is just a masterclass in that, where everybody, the casting of who they picked, and then how they dress them, and how they introduce them to the audience is just incredible.
Yeah, and Neill, like Sam Neill getting the Indiana Jones introduction is just adorable to me, because his whole thing, his whole persona as Alan Grant is someone who is competent, capable, knowledgeable, the smartest guy in the world, but he doesn't want to be there. He would really rather not be, like, he doesn't want to be, from the very beginning, he doesn't want to be talking to kids on that dig. He just wants to be working. And then he has the opportunity to go to this thing, which is incredible, and instantly sees what goes wrong and is right in the middle of it and really doesn't want to be. Just the constant, it's not reluctance. Like, he is a man of action, but he just knows this isn't going to go well. He knows this isn't what he wants, and he's still being a hero about it, which is something no other Spielberg character. I thought about this a long, long time afterwards. It's like, that is a unique performance, and it really amplifies it in Jurassic Park 3, where he gets roped into this whole rescue thing on a false pretense, which is just great because it does put him back to one in that situation where it's like, nope, shit, I don't want to be here either. And then finally they bring him back in Jurassic World Dominion, and it's not as much fun because he's resigned at this point. But watching his evolution as a reluctant everything to finally calming down and accepting that there might be kids in his future, as well as surviving dinosaurs and everything else, it's a completely undervalued performance. Like nobody leaves that movie talking about how great Sam Neill is because the whole cast is terrific, but also because it's not about them, it's about the dinosaurs. But Neill is so good and knows exactly what he's doing.
No, totally. I mean, that is like a tightrope to walk of like being grumpy and like not wanting to be there, but still having enough charm and like enough kind of pathos that you don't turn the audience against you. But I think part of it is also like, it is just, any normal person who likes dinosaurs would be so excited to go to this theme park. And so you're like, of course, on a simple level, anybody who watches this movie would be like, oh my God, that'd be cool. But then to imagine like, who would this be the coolest thing on earth for? It's the person who has spent 40 years researching dinosaurs. And it's like, it is just they really are able to make it personal and make it seem even more high stakes, where you're like, okay, obviously he knows this is a bad idea, but it's his fantasy. And like, if anybody would potentially look past the moral or ethical considerations, it's the person who loves these things the most, and all he wants to do, he's devoted his life to finding them. And I think that's also something that like, I think that while these characters, I think they all have a surprising amount of depth, and it's all shown in such little time, in such economy, where you really don't find out that much about that many of them. But even just hearing Ian Malcolm in the car, like, I'm always looking for a future Xmas Malcolm, like, and you're just like, oh, I get it, I get who this guy is. And like, and that's what I think is like such a incredible feat, is that the amount of time you completely understand who every character in that movie is and where they stand in relationship to one another, and the shades of their personalities and their moral kind of standing within the universe of the film.
Yeah, even Sam Jackson, who has like 4 sentences before he gets eaten, has those 4 sentences to just sort of show us that he is still the coolest guy on the planet, no matter what movie he's in. But there's a confidence to the way that the movie moves, which again is Spielberg, right? The man has an almost uncanny ability to place the camera where the characters are, where the story goes, where the development is going to be, and you get to the ride along with the 3 of them, with Sam Neill, Laura Dern, and Jeff Goldblum, Alan Ellie and Ian in the Jeep, having their relationship dynamics laid out in front of each other, not just for us, right? Like they're actually actively engaged in either flirting or being annoyed by flirting, or understanding that their partner is being annoyed by this flirting, but still going with it anyway, too annoyed. Like Laura Dern gets no credit either for the layers she gives to Ellie, as somebody who is way too young for the guy she's with. Even though I don't think their ages are that dramatically different, she plays younger. She reads. Ellie has so much more life than Alan does. And the nature of their relationship is sort of vague, right? Like it's never explicitly laid out in the movie, but it's also pretty clear from the way he responds to Malcolm that they're in a relationship. And I like that too, that there are no big speeches. They're separated almost immediately once the chaos starts and have to find their way back to each other. And that's almost incidental, because surviving individually is how we define them, as how we see them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think what you said, like, there's no big speeches. Like, I think there's a version of this movie, and I feel like people criticize Spielberg and say he's like overly sentimental, but I'm like, that relationship is just like proof that he can handle like a nuanced, complex thing that is all basically subtext. And I mean, not completely subtext, but like, and I think that's one of the other things is like, I think this is a movie that is a masterclass in exposition, because every single time you are learning about information, whether it's about the world or about the characters, like it's delivered in a way that's incredibly clever. It's always motivated by one of the characters learning something either about the world or about each other. And, I think there's so many traps that filmmakers fall into when it comes to like the nitty gritty technical side of delivering exposition or something like that. And this just has it all motivated through character, through relationships. Going back to kind of what you were saying before about like the technical side of it, I think, what I said was like every time I watch this movie, I notice something different. And, I remember like 3 times ago that I watched this film, I realized that like, the T-Rex breaks out of the through the electric fence, stomps around the car. There's that whole amazing sequence. And then he lifts the car and pushes it over the edge. And suddenly on the other side of the fence, it's a cliff. And there was no cliff there before. And it's like, it's such a perfect example of there's always people who go online and are like, oh my God, but wait a second, the continuity. And you're like, it does not matter. And like, you do not notice that until you've watched the movie like 9 or 10 times where you're like, oh, there was never a cliff on the other side of that. In fact, like in order to get over that, the T-Rex had to walk over that section of ground, but like what they needed was for the car to go over a cliff there. And that's what made the most sense. And I just listened to an interview with David Koepp, and he was talking about one of the other big continuity things is at the end when the T-Rex comes in and grabs the raptor. And he apparently said to Spielberg, and he was just like, well, how does he get in the building? Like, and Spielberg was like, I don't know, put up a plastic sheet on the one side and say that it's like under construction still. And he's like, okay, but then, does he make sounds? Like we just established that, you can hear him from a mile away. And Steven Spielberg was just like, it does not matter. Like what people are going to be focused on is that it's so cool that a T-Rex has bursted through here and saved the day. And like, that's what's most important.
He's not wrong.
And I think, but that I think is also like a really important lesson for filmmakers too, of like, obviously continuity matters to a certain degree, but like movies are dreams and they're emotional experiences. And sometimes you need to cheat those things and figure out what's going to be the most powerful and most affecting for people. And there's obviously a line, but you should be pushing it.
Yeah. And Koepp has these incredible instincts for logic, and that is interesting that Spielberg is the one who said, doesn't matter. Because he's right. And I just, in my head, I'm already making excuses. It's like, well, the score was really loud. I didn't hear the dinosaur. I probably would have if there wasn't an orchestra blaring at me, but it doesn't matter. And the mastery of that sequence, like the dinosaur skeleton becoming individual cages for characters and the raptors circling in. And yeah, it's the metaphor becoming real. Honestly, I mean, I know it's not the way the book ended, but I can't imagine any other way for that single sequence to pay off. Especially because whoever it was who came up with the banner when dinosaurs ruled the earth coming down in triumph at the end of it. I saw that I saw that at the York Theatre of Blessed Memory in Toronto, probably in 70 millimeter. It must have been in 70 millimeter, in their big room on the Wednesday night before the film opened, and the audience would not stop screaming. Like it was applause that turned into its own crescendo. It was just like being held in the hand of an absolute master. And I'd read the book. I don't know. I mean, it was a bestseller. I'm sure some of the other people in that theater had, but it was a mixed audience. It was radio contest winners, like kids and adults, and a lot of people who just won tickets randomly and showed up, and we were all in it. It played like a concert. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it really is. I think the other thing is like, it is really funny. And I think, he has such a great, both the writing and the directing, like he knows how to tell a joke. And there's also a bunch of different types of jokes in the movie. There's dialogue jokes, there's visual gags. I mean, like the scene where Dennis Nedry is like, doing a do-si-do with the dinosaur around a tree. It's like Buster Keaton-esque, like physical comedy. He like falls down, and like it's so kind of over the top. But I think that's also something that I always like love about this film and other films in general, is like a movie that isn't afraid to kind of change tones here and there. And it is unified by a vision and a voice, but like it understands that like the scary moments will be scarier if you also have funny moments, and vice versa. And I think that, Jordan Peele has talked a lot also about like, the way that comedy and horror work the same. And I think so many people focus on Spielberg as this blockbuster filmmaker, but like he's so good at telling jokes and selling jokes and making them work, and that is, I think, an underappreciated aspect of his work.
Oh, I agree. I mean, the confidence he has in his actors to sell moments with just a glance or a smirk or a shrug or a stumble. You know, the sense that these people are vulnerable with each other, and not just in Jurassic Park, but in everything. I mean, I was watching Raiders again recently, and there's just so much warmth and humor in everything Karen Allen does. Even when she's running for her life, she's sort of frustrated and flustered in a comic way that contrasts with, you know, Harrison Ford's stone-faced deal as Indy, where it's a front, like he's putting up this tough guy front. We see who he really is. He's got glasses and he's flustered when his students come on to him. But the performance of Indiana Jones as masculinity and competence and 30s action hero versus what Marion is doing in that same reality, in that same moment, like, you know, like, look, Herr Mack with the Nazis, she's cutting through all the bullshit in a way that makes the film richer and better, right? Because we're in on it with her. And in Jurassic Park, there's so many characters. Like Ian Malcolm is obviously the most kind of truth-telly.
Say what you're thinking out loud.
Yeah, but the audience surrogate who's also puncturing the reality of the movie constantly by saying this is going to go terribly wrong, everybody's going to die. But that's what we're here for. That's why we love him.
Yeah, 100. I mean, I think that is part of also what's really important in science fiction and at fantasy, or it is having a very acute sense of reality. And I think that if you were to take 5 people to an island, whether it's dinosaurs or monsters or anything there, like different people react in different ways, and being conscious of the fact that certain people react to situations with humor, and that is their defense mechanism, and rooting that in character, and making sure that it is not necessarily like taking away from anything. But I think like that to me is the details of like the way that people would react to things in real life is what kind of grounds science fiction. And even though you have all of this insane stuff happening, like, you know, if I was there on that island, I'd be being like, yeah, okay, this is cool, but what about the ethics of this? And like, is anyone else thinking about that? You know, like, and I think, you know, thinking about where, you know, even just like the little details of like somebody getting stuck on and killed on a toilet, it's like such a great gag, but it's like obviously like they need to build toilets for this park, and like thinking about the you know, the real life logistics of like, well, you know, we need a place for this person to die. What's a place that would be next to the paddock if someone needed it? And again, like, I guess they're on this motorized thing that's supposed to have locks on it, so there probably shouldn't be like a bathroom that they can get out and walk to. But again, it's like, who cares?
The employees will need one, right? I mean, there's going to be people outside, and maybe the goal is to ultimately have a walkthrough like any other zoo. I get it. Like you're right. The logistics of it are so believable that you can build them out in your seat while you're watching the movie. Yeah, because, you know, obviously I worked at a theme park. There's bathrooms where you wouldn't expect them. Yeah. But I think that like that anyone who's ever tried to do anything, that's just a very wide range of people. But like, if you've tried to build something or make a movie or like organize a group of people, like, or go on vacation somewhere, you know, like something always goes wrong, and it's never the thing you expect or anticipate. And I think that in itself is like, you just bring that sense of reality of like, you know, that you have these different little world building details that you suddenly believe that this place is a real place. And that goes so far.
Hey, it's Norm interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week I wrote about Warner's new 4K edition of Steven Soderbergh's Contagion, timely, and the Criterion release of Eric Romaire's Tales of the Four Seasons. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I still like writing about them. Come check it out. that does bring me to my favorite point of this movie, which is that for all the predictions and all the chaos, it would have worked. Everything would have been fine if Nedry hadn't had the system shut down. Everybody looks back on Jurassic Park as this massive disaster, and it's true. The point of the novel and the point of the movie, humans will screw it up. It's not the dinosaurs' fault. They're just creatures, which is, again, the smartest thing that they came up with when making the movie, is to treat them like animals, not like calculating monsters, except for the raptors, who work together but have just the tiniest bit of character, right? Like they are not at fault. They're just doing their thing. It's the people that mess it up.
100%. I mean, it's man versus nature, and I think the opinion of the movie, which is an opinion I agree with, which is that like nature does not have any biases or forgiveness for humans' mistakes, and that in itself is kind of part of human nature, is that, you know, nature is unforgiving, and it doesn't care if you had good intentions or not. And I think Nedry obviously played a big role in it, but at the end of the day, like the dinosaurs were breeding and they evolved, and I think if it wasn't Nedry, something else could have probably gone wrong, and the park would probably still get out of control in another way, because I think that is, you know, this is the Pandora's box of all technology, which is once it's out of the box, you can't get it back in. So yeah.
That's fair. I mean, I guess Nedry in a way saved untold hundreds of thousands of lives, because it was, as we see in Jurassic World, if the park had been populated, it would have been way, way worse.
Yeah, it's very true.
So he's really a hero.
Exactly. Yeah,
I'm sure he sees himself that way. And I remember too the feeling of absolute delight and wonder that happened in that theater, not just in the Brontosaurus sequence, which is just gorgeous, but in the T-Rex attack, which I think might actually be one of the 2 or 3 greatest sequences ever conceived and executed. There was nothing wrong with it, and the timing, the tension, the mix of CG and practical, we kind of laugh at it now because it plays as so obvious, but the first time through, it was just a revelation.
I think that sequence, even just the visual effects of it, you know, stand up incredibly well. And I think that's also, you know, something that's like, I can't believe that 20 years later or 30 years later, it is still, you believe that T-Rex at night. And, you know, I think they use different aspects in different shots. And so, you know, when it's in a close-up, it's the animatronic. When it's in a wide, it's CG. And I think
if you can see the feet, it's CG.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, even just the editing of that scene is like the kids are in trouble, the kids are in danger, and there's a full minute of it sniffing around and Ian Malcolm and Grant just watching in the car. And I think, like, again, this is another cheat of, like, in real life, if this was happening, you would probably act a little bit faster. I think they would. I don't think they'd sit there for a full minute while this T-Rex is terrorizing these children, but they're just paralyzed, and it really just puts you in the state of like, oh my God, I'm just forced to watch this from afar, and I can't do anything. And like, it really is an incredibly well edited sequence, and I think he really just elongates that time, and I think that is what makes a great action sequence.
The other thing I would argue is the thing that he and Dean Cundey figured out in pre-production, apparently, which is that they moved the camera ahead or behind of the creatures, of the dinosaurs, to convey the sense. There's this amazing Cinefex issue that came out, right? You know, like the summer '93 Cinefex issue that came out, had the T-Rex on the cover, and it was all Jurassic Park all the time. And they had this incredible access. They talked to everybody. They talked to Dennis Muir, and then they talked to Spaz Williams, and they talked to Cundey. And Cundey's genius of it was that to convince the audience that the dinosaurs are actually there, they followed them for the most part. They cheated. They lead the actors a little. The camera will start moving sometimes before people start moving, but it's always behind the dinosaur action by a few frames. So they would basically add the CG before the camera starts moving in a shot to make you believe that the operator is trying to keep up with an unpredictable creature. And it's genius.
Yeah, I mean, I think that too is people like to complain about CG, and there is a lot of subpar CG out there, but I also think so much of it is if you can create a thrilling sequence, if you can create thrilling characters, like nobody really cares that much that the CG is not the best CG in the world. And I think things like that of like filming so much of it at eye level, the movie has such an incredible sense of scale, and part of that is like letting things exit the frame and not just I think there's a huge over reliance on like wanting to make things feel epic by having a huge sweeping drone shot that goes across stuff. And like they have their helicopter shots, but even when they're introducing the island, they go into this canyon, and it's so much more magnificent to see like the canyon of that island go out of frame than it is to like see the entire island in a shot. And I think that is like the way that they shot the dinosaurs too, is like they let them leave the frame. They didn't try to show everybody everything at all times.
Yeah, it's an understanding too that we'll be craning our necks, right? Like we want more inherently in this thing.
Yeah.
And Spielberg said he wanted to shoot it in 185 instead of scope because he wanted the dinosaurs to be taller, specifically because he knew that it would just be more impressive to have to accommodate them instead of panning from side to side. He said it, I think he literally said it would have worked for the Brontos, but not for the T-Rex. But it has to be tall. They have to be like, the frame has to be able to show us how these humans are dwarfed by them. And even though they cheated by making raptors the size of the raptors they are, because they really would have been the size of chickens, apparently. It's smart. It doesn't matter that we don't know that. Like, it doesn't matter that you find out later that raptors are too small. It's like, well, maybe it's DNA. They screwed with something. It's fine. Because it gets us where we want to be, which is to have a genuinely interesting threat that is different and new. Crichton's use of the raptors in the book was the big deal because they were a relatively unknown species. And I remember there was there really weren't, raptors were not anything. It was a word you used for birds until the book Jurassic Park, and then the movie really cemented it because it made them this fascinating adversary and clever girl and all that. But they are genuinely dangerous. They are, by the end of the movie, they're scarier than the T-Rex. The T-Rex is the thing that saves us.
100%. I mean, and again, it just comes back to that like setup and payoff of like that one of the introductions to Alan Grant is like showing him being completely insensitive to the feelings of a child and talking to him about how viscerally horrible it is to be eaten by a raptor. And like, I just think that like that type of violence is so much more interesting and creative than, because it's implied and your imagination will do so much more. And like, you never see, I mean, you see like a severed arm. That's the most like actual blood that you kind of see, but so much of the rest of it, you see the guy getting pulled into the cage at the beginning, so much of it is implied, because I really think that if you can fill in the blanks with your own mind, it's so much scarier.
Yeah, and that's the Jaws lesson, right? I mean, the shark didn't work, so they had to hide it, and instead they invented a way to make people tap into their own personal fears. I mean, I've argued, we did a short video thing about this at TIFF a couple of years ago. Everybody knew what the shark looked like because it was on the poster and it was on the paperback, and it was one of the most instantly available images in pop culture for the last 2 years before the movie came out. So that's less of a sell. But Jurassic Park, we all know what dinosaurs look like. What's going on in our brain is which dinosaur is in that crate? What's going on exactly in this moment? Why can't I see it? I want to see the dinosaur, which is, of course, the whole point of the movie. And instead of delaying something that you're afraid of, he gives us something he gives us something that we are in wonder of, in awe of, and then makes it hungry. Which, again, just like as a progression, it's just beautiful. It's musical.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even just opening the movie with a kill, it's like a classic horror kind of trope. But to have the thing that kills you also be like so awe-inspiring, I think is comes back to the philosophy of nature in this movie, which is that it's like awe-inspiring and extremely brutal and uncaring. And I think people can see that and they agree.
Yeah. And I love the subtext too, which is that everything Hammond does is an attempt to soften and make them adorable and cutesify them. The film, the educational film that they created, which is so perfectly of the 1950s, like Mr. DNA being a straight line from the duck and cover films that would have been shown to children that Spielberg himself is clearly imprinted on, and having it be just the most condescending. There is science in there, but there's also the sense in the narration that, oh, you don't need to know all this stuff. This is the complicated, silly things. We're gonna make a cartoon avatar tell you all about them, so we don't have to actually tell you the hard science. And then Hammond is filling in we use frog DNA, like filling in all the stuff that he won't tell consumers because he wants them to have this cuddly experience. And then nothing about the dinosaurs is cuddly. There's not a single one of them that is. I mean, some of them are probably not threatening. I'm not afraid of the herbivores, but they could still trample you, as you see in the Gallimimus stampede. Like, there's danger everywhere.
Yeah, 100%. But even that exposition scene of the Mr. DNA, it's like, I love it when a scene serves multiple purposes. It obviously serves the point of getting across some of the backstory of the park, but it also shows what they're leaving out of the park. It also has all the characters kind of getting up from the ride, which demonstrates the fact that they are not going to kind of just go along with the show, which is foreshadowing the entire movie, which is that you can design a theme park ride, but if someone breaks it, then they can get out and do whatever they want. And it also is kind of taking us on this tour of the facility. And so I think it like that one scene showcases all the characters, it showcases the world, it showcases the theme of the film. And it's also really funny, like they put in a bunch of jokes and a bunch of gags to keep it interesting. And they do it in a way that, kind of breaks the style of the movie, but it's motivated. So it's okay. And, it really just is firing on all cylinders in every scene. I'm amazed every time I watch it, really.
Yeah, we didn't get to I didn't ask to begin with. You're a little younger than I am. Did you see it in 93? Were you old enough to see it the first time around, or did you catch it later?
2 years old in 1993. Okay. So I don't think I was shown it as a 2-year-old.
So what was your first experience?
I honestly do not remember. I think we probably rented it from Blockbuster and watched it at home on VHS, because that's how I saw most of the first movies I saw. And I mean, I remember liking it as a kid, but I don't think I really appreciated like all the different levels that it worked on. But it definitely was like one of the first movies that I fell in love with and was like, oh, this is incredible.
Have you seen it in the theater? Did you ever get the chance? I
haven't. I never have. You're making me realize I really should.
It'll come back. There'll be a chance. I mean, there's in Canada, Cineplex runs these IMAX film festivals where they screen basically they screen 2K and 4K versions of films in the IMAX room, or sometimes it's not even IMAX. Sometimes it's just a digital film festival, and they'll screen it in the theater, and it's a discounted price and all of that. And I'm always amazed at how many people will come and see a favorite film for the first time. And I've hosted a few at TIFF since then of like kind of retro screenings. And it is so great to see 200 people in a room for a movie they all know. Yeah. But it's even better. The best. Yeah. But it's even better to ask who hasn't seen it. I mean, when I do one of these, I'll do the 3-stage question, which is, good. Who's seen it before, who hasn't seen it at all, who hasn't seen it in a theater. And then you get this general kind of murmur and this sense of excitement building. Is like, oh my God, that's right. I've never seen this in a theater. And there's all these other people here who love it as much as I do. It is the best feeling.
It is really great. I love ref screenings. I remember I went to a screening of Point Break and at the IFC Center in New York, and the sound wasn't playing, and it like opens on a bunch of shots of waves, and there was a problem with the projection, but the entire audience just started making ocean sounds together. And it was just like everyone's here because they love this movie, and it's the best feeling. It's great.
God, I wonder how many of them could have done the dialogue. probably a lot.
Yeah, someone went and talked to them and told them to put on the sound because I don't think anyone wanted to do that for the whole movie. But
somebody would have.
Those repertory screens. I mean, I can just imagine, seeing the hold on to your butts and everyone just starts cheering.
Yeah, we had a Spielberg. It was before I joined TIFF, but they did a Spielberg retrospective in 2016, maybe, or 2017, and I missed it. I could not get to any of the ones I wanted to go see. And Jurassic Park, Jaws, Raiders. He makes movies to be seen big, but he makes movies to be seen with an audience too. And that's the other thing about Jurassic Park. It is one of the great crowd pleasers.
Yeah.
It's so built for a group experience, like just to actually feel everyone's hair go up on their arms, or to laugh and breathe, to exhale in the way. And he's so good at that too. He doesn't do buttons on scenes. He just lets them breathe out. And the way he breaks things up here and there, the banner floating down at the end of the big confrontation at the very end is one, but even just like the little moment of laughter for the objects in the mirror, maybe closer than they are.
Oh my God. Incredible.
He denies that was a joke. He has said repeatedly that it was just the mirror. He didn't even think about it. He knew. There's no way he didn't know. Or Michael Kahn did. The editor knew and hung on it a little bit longer, because it's the exact perfect moment. The score drops down a little bit. You get to breathe into it, and then you get the second to let the text register. It's just like, it is a tiny throwaway joke, but it is orchestrated by a master.
Yeah, I mean, but that again is a detail from real life of, like, these are specialty cars that are on a remote island that were like built custom for this place. Like, they could have easily not had mirrors that didn't have that detail on them, but they did, and that is, everyone has, like, it's a universal experience looking in your rearview mirror and seeing something behind it and wondering if it's actually that far. And so it's just, it's incredible the way he taps into that. I mean, we rewatched Catch Me If You Can the other day, and also hilarious movie, some incredible jokes, but like it always starts from a place of character, and I think like building up that empathy, and then when you get these characters in these action scenes, I think if you were to show any of these set pieces on their own, they function so great. But because he has spent that time getting you to care about these people, then when after, they survive one of these harrowing experiences, like, that's why people cheer.
Yeah. I have to ask, you had Paloma Garcia Lee, who played Graziella in West Side Story, in your film. Did you ask her anything at all about the Spielberg experience? Because I would not leave people alone if I knew they had that connection.
Our movie was so small and everyone was wearing so many hats that, like, Paloma was so lovely to work with, but I just didn't have time to, like, talk to her about anything other than the, like, specifics of everything that needed to get done. And I joked with her a little bit after we were done filming, and because she had done some TV, but I think this was her first indie film, and the only other film that she had been in was West Side Story. And so, after we wrapped, I was like, "So, am I better or worse than Steven Spielberg?" And I think she laughed it off and didn't really respond. But that's okay.
She's a pro.
So, yeah, I mean, it's got to be an incredible experience to work with him, and I think she had nothing but incredibly nice things to say, and so, there were no real surprises of, like, he's a genius. Of course, he's super nice. Everybody kind of already knows these things about him. So it was nice to hear he, lives up to his reputation from someone who's actually worked with him.
Yeah. I got to ask Sam Neill about it once. I've interviewed him 4 or 5 times over, I guess 20 years or so. And he just said he has the most fun pretending with him, with Spielberg, that was the appeal of Jurassic Park, was to run around and wave your arms and yell at something that wasn't there, and to reconnect with that, because he'd made effects films before, and he the Final Conflict was his first big break, and that was a sort of a genre work where it was all grounded in ridiculous, and this had to be grounded in real, but also emotionally convincing. And it just, like, all he did was say, well, what would you do? How would you, what would you do? And find the performance that way. And it just sounds like the best way to make a movie like this, to invite people into this collective hallucination and let them know that they're safe. In going as big or as small as you want to, and Goldblum being Goldblum and all that is perfect for the film, but you also have to believe he's genuinely hurt and that these creatures could still break in at any moment. And Spielberg finds a way to make it feel playful, and I think John Williams scores a lot of that too, because it's bombastic in a way that lets you know that you're watching a movie, but still feels appropriate to the emotional scale. Like finding the tone is the most important thing for any movie, but to find the tone for something like this, to make it like, to acknowledge that you are on a ride as much as the characters are, but that there's still growth and change and emotional realism happening all around you all the time. I don't know how he did it. I still don't know. It's this, none of the sequels does it. They don't try necessarily.
He's such an interesting filmmaker. And I mean, I think what you were saying is spot on, where it seems like from everything I've read about him, he is someone who's just so open to collaboration and so open to involving people in his process and not necessarily like trying to fit square pegs in round holes. And I think that kind of flexibility, I think, one of the things that kind of blew my mind that I read maybe 5 or 10 years ago was like, there's a transcript of him, George Lucas, and I think it's Lawrence Kasdan, like talking about Indiana Jones. I think you can find it online. Oh, wow. And it's a transcript, like, because they recorded their conversation, and you see them coming up with the ideas for Indiana Jones together.
Oh, so like, and the original script strategy sessions. Oh, wow.
Basically of them talking about, of coming up like, what if we did a character that was like this? And oh my God, what if there's a sequence where he like goes, avoids a boulder or something? And it's a crazy document of like the way that creativity works. And it's also mind blowing because as someone who grew up like worshiping Steven Spielberg and like George Lucas and like all these people, and like, I think when you're starting out as an artist, you're like, oh my God, they're geniuses. They must have something figured out, and it must have taken them years and years and years to figure out, they must be so smart, and every word that they say must be so intelligent. And then you read this transcript and it's filled with like pretty bad ideas. And like, but I think it's such a important lesson because like, they aren't afraid to be like, okay, what if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? And it to me was like a pivotal moment of being like, oh my God, part of the way that you come up with something amazing is that you go through a lot of the bad ideas first, and you aren't precious about coming up with things, and you find ways to take other people's ideas and riff off of them and collaborate with the people around you. And, and that is how you end up with something as incredible as Indiana Jones. And, so that like has always stuck with me in terms of, when I think about my work and how I want to be making things, and kind of this like iterative process of just inviting people in and then playing with them and having a good time. Because I think that is, like you said, I think he is, a lot of people have talked about how he's kind of a little kid who never grew up. And I think kind of that sense of childlike wonder is such an inherent part of his films. And you can just sense that his personality comes through in that willingness to joke around, but also he has the perspective of an adult in there, where it's not just, childhood fantasy, because I think there's this like wistfulness to all of his fantastic and science fiction concepts of like the disconnect between ideals and reality, and the disconnect between fantasy and reality, and that their relationship between their relationship to each other.
Yeah, you nailed it. He can be a child and an adult at the same time, and hold both of those perspectives in his movie, which is, I think that's the thing that The Fabelmans is about. That he was
I love that movie.
Yeah, he wasn't necessarily comfortable talking about it that way at the festival when he brought it out, but I didn't get to meet him, which was my greatest regret. I was always 35 feet or more away from him. I knew exactly where he was, and I was never there. And it's like, this is killing me. I can pass people in the hallway. I just want to breathe the same air, which, during COVID is probably not the thing you want to do, but it's just so frustrating that I didn't get to experience that firsthand, because I do think that movie is the film, like West Side Story. It's a movie he's been thinking about making his entire adult life, but it goes back to when he was a kid and had those first vivid experiences of seeing West Side Story as a child and having that blow his head back. but also, or I guess he would have been in his early teens, but also the Fabelmans to watch his parents through the lens of someone who thinks in images, right? And probably understood the dynamics of that relationship deteriorating before it ever fell apart, but didn't know it. And then 60 years later makes this film about it. And it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. I mean, I was so blown away by it. And I think, I mean, whenever I hear about a filmmaker making something autobiographical that's like about their own lives and about how they got into making movies, like I'm very hesitant to sign on, because there are so many right? self-indulgent movies where like I just do not care. I'm sorry. Like and so when I heard the subject of it, I was like, we'll see. But I mean, I think it's like he was also part of what I think makes him really interesting is that he's like Kubrick, where he has either adapted or worked with other people, and so much of his stuff is not self-originated. And to see him self-originate something, but then collaborate with a writer on it and make it so that it was not self-indulgent and still be able to like make those creative cheats. And, you know, it's been a while since I've seen the movie, but there were experiences that I remember them talking about in interviews where like, you know, they did the equivalent kind of the cliff in Jurassic Park, where it's like, well, what's actually best for the story here is this. And that gets to the truth of the matter more so than the physical limitations of reality. And there's enough there that, you know, it still is kind of this biopic, but he has that distance from it. And he's able to, you know, not be too close to the material, even though it was clearly like his most personal movie.
Yeah, it's an incredible work. And, you know, on some level, I'm offended that anyone gets to make two back-to-back masterpieces that late in their career. But on the other hand, it's Steven Spielberg. And if anybody can, he's the guy.
Yeah, definitely.
I would not describe Molli and Max in the future as Spielbergian, but it is infected by a couple of things that he does, right? Which is ground the fantastical material in human neurosis and humanity and frailty. Well, the idea of a version of When Harry Met Sally that traces the sort of ping-ponging of two distinct people throughout a decade plus of their lives, but doing it in a fantastical Ready Player One kind of universe. That's the Spielberg hook for me. It's like you found a way to do it, but you did the thing that he didn't, which is find the humanity in the text. Because not to invite other people to shit on Ready Player One, but I think it's a film that just like he made it because he wanted to do The Shining. I don't think he really cared about the rest of it, and it kind of comes through. But for all the VR and for all the digital backgrounds and volumes and things, you found a way to do it that focuses entirely on the people inside these big preposterous worlds. And that felt like a miracle to me too. So was there like, were you influenced by any particular choices that Spielberg has made over the years, or is like that just not applicable to a film as small and logistically restricted as this?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's one of my biggest influences in my kind of creative sensibility in terms of wanting, I think great movies are not just one note and great characters are not just one note. And something that he has in all of his movies is a variety of tones. And you can go from kind of intense horror imagery and filmmaking to slapstick comedy to, kind of emotional, sincere scenes. And I think that to me is one of the things that makes him one of the greats and a master filmmaker is this ability to juggle multiple tones, multiple subject matters, to root everything in character and start out from, what is the emotional experience I want to give to people. And so there aren't really any direct references to Jurassic Park in this film. It really has nothing to do with it. But I think, to me, watching E.T., watching Jurassic Park, watching Catch Me If You Can, the kind of, Spielberg has this like wonder push where a camera goes in on a character and you see them looking at something off screen. And like, to me, that is like the essence of his filmmaking, which is that like, how do you show awe and wonder? And then also how do you kind of show the flip side of that, of like the dangers of that? And so I think his kind of filmmaking philosophy is something I think about a lot. And, I think that the best way to get, I think the best way to say the things that you want to say is to like put them in a package that is interesting and entertaining and funny, and that you can kind of talk about deeper themes in a way that's entertaining, and striking that balance between, challenging your audience and giving them what they want is really, really difficult. But it's something that I try to kind of aim for.
The fact that a movie that exists almost entirely in absurdity, like the absurdity of the idea that in the future we will still be neurotic dorks, but like that humans don't change, right? Like that the nature of, and not even humans, fish people, don't change. Like we will all still be more or less who we are now, and we will all relate to each other on that base level, is something I think that rings through Spielberg's work as well somehow, because his humanity and his need to keep the stories relatable is such, like even in AI, where he's trying to ape Kubrick, but he's not getting there. Like the barrier to that in that film, this fascinating contradiction of like one of the warmest hearted filmmakers trying to tell the story that this cerebral, not necessarily cold hearted, but dispassionate filmmaker would have made.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting exercise in compromise. And I think the reason some people love it is because it feels like a simulation. But the reason I've always felt ambivalent towards it is because it feels like a simulation. Like we're getting his version. It's Cronenberg's line about computers and the flesh and the fly. Like you have to teach the computer how to love the flesh. And this is the opposite proposition. But Molli and Max are characters who are so instantly normal and representative of the audience. I think like they're designed for us to connect to in a preposterous world. So how do you get your actors to pretend along with you in that same way that Spielberg got Sam Neill to plug into Jurassic Park? Was there a trick to that? Because you're challenging them to act in a reality that simply doesn't exist and won't exist until it's made up later in the computers afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, it's a process, but part of it is that in the writing stage, like to me, science fiction and fantasy are about using metaphors and allegories to kind of explore things that are common. And so, the genesis of the movie was what I think is now chapter 4 in the film, where it kind of goes into Molly's backstory, and we see that she's ended up in this toxic relationship. And that was the first section of the film that I wrote, even though it ended up in the middle of the film. And it was, about, I was never in like a toxic romantic relationship, but I was working with somebody who was just really mean and made me feel really bad about myself. And I was complaining about it to a friend, and they were like, it kind of sounds like you're dating a shitty dude. And, I have since ended that business relationship, thankfully, but, it was the genesis for this, like, wow, it is, even though I feel like I've always been someone who has like a high sense of self-worth, like just hanging around someone who just is really kind of harsh and cruel can really make you question a lot about who you are and what you're doing and why you're doing it. And, I kind of built it out from there of just like, how do we tell the story of somebody being in a toxic relationship that escapes? And obviously then how do, once you've been in a toxic relationship, and then, how does that influence your next relationship? And how did you end up in that relationship in the first place? And then, if I know that she wants to end up with somebody that completes her in multiple ways, then who is that person and what are they bringing to the table? And so it really kind of all started from a place of like, what are the experiences that I want to convey? And similarly, in Max's backstory, it was, what happens when you're in a relationship with somebody who works on paper but you don't really have an emotional connection to. And it's like, all right, let's use a robot, of like him dating a robot as this metaphor. And so it always starts from that common experience, and that's what you can always kind of fall back on. So you can have all this insane screwball comedy robot who's talking like Katharine Hepburn and moving 1,000 miles a minute, but at the same time, like what matters is that it is their relationship, is the character, and that was always something that you could fall back on. So it's like, part of working with the actors too is like, we're not making any pop culture references. certain things like that, where like someone throws one out and then you're like, something feels weird about that. Let's just not bring up that pulp culture reference. The movie makes jokes that are allusions to things, but there aren't really any direct calling out or like breaking of that reality, which I think is important.
Well, just having, you've invented Glorb, this fake drink, and have the characters bonding over the fact that neither of them really likes it, and then Molly falls back on, well, I kind of like Diet Glorb, which is such a completely recognizable reflex. It's just like, no, this movie knows what it's doing. This is like this is a film that completely understands its own assignment.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, but I think that is also like just trying to find something that is, and I'm pretty sure that was it. That scene was improvised by Zasha. And I think she came up with that line. But I think, we spent 5 days kind of rehearsing the movie together, and I would rehearse it with them. We'd read through the first 20 pages, and then I would go home and I would rewrite those first 20 pages. And then 3 or 4 days later, I'd come back and we would read it through again. And, it's a great way to kind of crash test things and then iterate. And because like when you're shooting, nobody wants to be the person that's slowing anything down. But if you're in a room and it's just you three, then people are much more comfortable being like, I don't know if I'd actually say that, or, what if I said this instead? And like, it's a safe space where people feel like they can kind of bring their own creativity. And then you kind of build up that trust so that then when you're on set, like she feels comfortable throwing something out like that. And, I think ideally, I think you absorb the themes of a film or a project kind of like subconsciously. And, I'm not trying to take credit for Zasha's improv, but I think like it was clear enough at that point that like, this is a world where, okay, people are, explicitly, they know that cheese is evil and is destroying everything, but they still use it because it tastes good. And that there is this kind of hypocrisy that we're all guilty of that is part of being like living in the modern world, where you live in a country that has a dark history and you have to kind of carry a lot of these conflicting ideas in your head. And so, I would hope that kind of comes through in those kind of improvs, because you're all kind of on the same page about like, what is the perspective of the film? What is our kind of goal here? And what are the lines that we kind of like don't really want to cross in terms of, being too direct in terms of referencing things, or, what kind of things will or won't work within this.
Yeah, you build a reality and you let people run around in it, scared of dinosaurs.
Yeah, exactly.
My thanks to Michael Lukk Litwak, whose delightful first feature, Molli and Max in the Future, is still playing in US theaters while making its way towards a North American VOD debut. Thanks also to Ted Geoghegan. He knows what he did. You can find Michael on Instagram at Michael Litwack, all one word, and you can find Jurassic Park on 4K and Blu-ray in a whole mess of different editions from Universal Studios Home Entertainment. It's also streaming on Netflix in the US and Canada, and on Prime Video in Canada as well, and available to rent and buy on various VOD services. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask when you go out, get the new booster when you can. I'll see you next week.